soft goods retailer that does clothing to have a food truck, but one of the breweries or the store down that does distilled the liquors have that opportunity, or even Dairy Queen that currently has an ongoing kitchen if they wanted to have an external kitchen. And interestingly enough, just the other weekend, there was a local restaurant that has a food license, and they actually had an external smoker up and going, which wouldn't be much different than having one. So I know that the local restaurants, we tried to look at that as well, and that's why I think we stuck with those businesses that currently are doing some kind of food service or have the opportunity to food service that would fit. So once again, I'm glad you guys are taking this over the line for us. Good luck. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it. Anybody else?
Mary Hasley, 726 North Shore Drive. I really have to start with a statement that the amount of work that's put into an ordinance is no indication whatsoever, I'm sorry to say, about the output. There's unintended consequences happening. In fact, we had that just this last year where 2 ordinances approved by the, recommended by the Planning Commission, approved unanimously by the City Council, were sent back to the Planning Commission to redo, and the City Council just recently voted on the environmental impact statement redo for the plan. So please do not say that it's good because of the amount of time. Comparisons, let's do apples to apples as opposed to grapefruit to grapes. When looking at different communities, let's look at sizes. Let's look at what are tourist town and not tourist town. South Haven is not the same thing as Grand Rapids. South Haven is not the same thing as other places, Austin, Texas, or Nashville. South Haven is South Haven, where we've had people leaving, and we don't have workers. Restaurants cannot stay open 7 days a week because they can't have staff. We also need to see competition is fine, but competition needs to be fair, and competition can't put one over another. And that's kind of a double-edged sword with this instance, because you want to protect the brick and mortar, but you want to have fair competition. But brick and mortars, to the best of my understanding, have a lot more expenses to pay towards the city and downtown development, et cetera. And so any fees for food trucks should be commensurate such that they're on an equal playing field. In this instance, with how voluminous this ordinance is, I think it's ripe for unintended consequences. I think the net has been cast too broadly. I'm not opposed to food trucks. I think it's a good idea. But it's location, location, location. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't be in residential areas. And I think I'm one of the strong advocates that I think, like with Fruit Street Kitchens, it was unfortunate that they couldn't have it in their residence, because I think all of the neighbors were very supportive. And so I think if you really want to make this flexible, you provide avenues such that if someone wants it in their neighborhood, and especially when their neighborhood is further from downtown, doesn't have other provisions for restaurants, that if the neighbors are accepting of it, then let them have it. And it would be for the 1 year, whatever time that is, January to January or the April to November. But let's see what some opening doors would do. It doesn't. And that's the problem. It's not one size fits all. And that's what this is cast so broadly to try and think of everything that could be wrong or what options are going to come before you. And I am very concerned that we're going to be right back here, just like we were with fire pits and the EIS of unintended consequences. I think if you had it less regimented, but not less stringent. so that there's checks and balances, which we just don't have right now. I think the track record is we don't have checks and balances. We cannot rely on discretion of staff. We need to have something built in, and one way to do that is by resolution. Each resolution for each food truck, you would have control of where they would go. The nearby residences impacted by them would have an opportunity to speak. And then we can figure out what's right for this community by having the citizens involved in helping draft the parameters of where we would want food trucks. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Diane Carlson, 74 South Haven Street. I too would like to see some food vendor trucks in South Haven. But like Mary said, location is everything. I'm concerned about residential areas where they might have more traffic than others and having food trucks there. Specifically for me, it's across from Kids Corner Park, and there's a lot of people there. It's still right in front of my house, so I'm hoping that we have enough regulations that would contain some of those food truck vendors being in certain areas, but not necessarily the residential areas. So I'd like to be mindful of the residents that are here, whether it's for one day of the week or whatever, if we keep that in mind, that the residents should have some say-so in that. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you.
That's Trevor Brooks, 555 Phoenix.
Good evening.
When I first proposed the idea of a food truck park at the Dairy Queen in my parking lot, I posted it on Facebook, and I got nearly 15% of the population of this town excited, like, oh my God, this is rated up. Food trucks is all about, like, everybody. I think it's pretty obvious that the majority of the people want food trucks. I recognize. Then the true question is how, where, that kind of stuff. You know, that's what we're going to hear to talk about today. The location is important, and ultimately, you know, the fundamental concern that everybody here is with the downtown is how does that affect the restaurants? I've shared a bunch of information and statistics and research that's been done across the United States, and the reality is there's no evidence that food trucks harm restaurants in any way, because it is a very different user experience. Food trucks are fundamentally grab and go. Restaurants, you sit down, you have the experience. They're quite a bit different. And the research that I found on this topic bears that out. In fact, it's technically the opposite, and I heard a couple of people here say it today. It's actually, the park becomes the destination, so it's actually an opportunity to potentially bring more people downtown that would say, you know what, I don't like any of these options at this park, I'm going to go see what the restaurants have. So I don't see how they're going to affect restaurants in any way, so I just wanted to bring that up. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Anybody else? Good evening.
Monique Crowley, 320 Fruit Street. I had this whole little paper I was going to read and everything else, but a lot of it I can kind of just, I don't want to say wing it, but just kind of tell you what it is. A lot of people have kind of said the same things over and over, and I think that it would be really nice just if we could somehow maybe make the ordinance, like, put together everything everybody's already agreeing upon, and, like, let's just put that out there as, like, the trial run, and, like, maybe implement all those extras down the road as we kind of go along. I don't know if that's possible or not, but it just seems like that's the only way to kind of incorporate everything else. I hate to say it, but it seems as though, like, the food truck park itself is, like, kind of what's putting everything on hold, like, or what's the biggest decision maker, or what is causing the most concern of all these food trucks having to now come downtown. I'm not really sure that the whole ordinance has to encompass that one business's request. Couldn't that be something completely separate from the city's ordinance, where he and the city just come up with something by resolution for his specific property, and the food truck ordinance just kind of be separate? It seems as though maybe that would help us pause this delay or stop the delay and just kind of move things forward. It seemed as though we were going in such a positive direction. I thought everybody was like in agreement on the year-round vending, and the trial run we had with Fruit Street Kitchen at A&D One Stop went over really well. And then here we came a whole year later, and bam, the brakes were pumped again, and we had to stop because we still didn't even get the year-round vending in there, which everybody was already kind of on board for. So if we could have put together some of the stuff that everybody was already in agreement on, let's put that ordinance out there. Everybody's in agreement. They can be here, can't be here. The places that are still kind of up in the air, let's kind of maybe revisit that or add them in down the road. Is that even something that's possible? Like, that's just like my suggestion. It seems as though it would help the ball keep rolling more in a positive direction versus just tossing it back and forth between the Planning Commission and City Council. So just my thoughts.
Sounds good. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Anybody else? Going once.
Jim Sankowski, 89 North Shire Drive, Bundy's
Jim.
Bakery. You guys all know how I feel. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, Mr. Stegman.
Mr. Smith.
How's that? How's those Spartans?
They're okay.
They're okay. Good evening.
Tim Stegman, 223 Huron. Good evening. Sorry to see that we had more planning commissioners here than council members.
I actually, when I heard I was missing somebody, I said, well, I hope I have a few more, but oh
Yeah.
well.
So I was hoping to hear some more discussion from the council before we commented, but one thing I'd like to say is the residential portion was a tough discussion. And unlike some of the other commissioners, one of my concerns comes in with the definition for food trucks. Is it a food truck or food trailer? And when you unhitch from the vehicle a food trailer, and you have that in a residential area, and if we like to think about long-range repercussions, and I forget the number of the ordinance right now, but right now we don't allow mobile homes on lots in town, right? We allow modulars, but we don't allow mobile homes like Superior and Blue Star, which is still a township piece of property. So I think there is a chance where if you're having trailers parked, where that could be challenged and people could say, well, and this goes with the housing right now, expensive housing, a mobile home is cheaper, right? So why couldn't you put that on a lot? So I think you got to pay close attention to the definition of what a food truck is, whether it's really mobile or whether it's unattached, right? So one comment.
I'll take it. Thank you. Appreciate it. Anybody else? And if not, we will get talking. Going once, going twice. Sold. Okay. Griffin, you running from here? So I know you've got a little, you've got some questions. We're going to have some discussion. There's some kind of forks in the road we need to discuss. But it might just be helpful. I heard some question just regarding what we've kind of how we've had discussion. I think staff's already taken some of our direction as far as the residential. You want to share kind of where you're currently at with that? Because I think we've kind of cleared some of that.
Yes, I can. I'll go back to the ordinance version slide first, I guess, to hit off on that. So just as a friendly reminder to everyone and to avoid as much confusion as possible is that there's probably going to be 3 different versions that we may be referencing. There's the existing ordinance. That's the ordinance that is in place presently. That's the ordinance that was sent to the Planning Commission to be reviewed. There's the proposed ordinance that was developed by the Planning Commission that was recommended by the Planning Commission to the City Council. That was also a proposed ordinance that was brought to the DDA at one meeting. There was some comments brought from some local businesses at that time, and there were also a public hearing held at the Planning Commission level. That ordinance was then brought to City Council this fall, and at a couple different times some feedback was provided, and there were a few items that, at least at that time, there seemed to be some consensus on from the City Council, and those items were incorporated into this third one, so the proposed ordinance based on all of your feedback so far. A few of the items that we'll get into when we go through some of these major topics that the mayor's referencing is some of that feedback is on things such as limiting the number of food truck permits, and more specifically, in regard to some location items. So I'll go ahead and go to this first slide. This talks a little bit about, or it provides a summary of the locations on private property based on the existing ordinance and the proposed ordinance, incorporating all of your feedback. If you look at that first bullet point, you'll note this is not the central business district and this is not residential districts. This is different from the ordinance that was developed by the Planning Commission and recommended to the City Council. This was incorporating that feedback from City Council on the 6th. Few handouts that are in front of you all that might be worth looking at. We also did put some maps up on the whiteboard for those in the public to take a look at. As you can tell, the shape of those maps don't fit real well on our slide, so we're going to try to multitask the best we can. But the first big difference to highlight in regard to the existing ordinance and the proposed ordinance is the existing ordinance limits food trucks to only the B2 and the B4 zoning districts on private property, where the proposed ordinance expands that area to the B1, B2, B3, and B4 business districts, as well as the industrial zones. Are there any comments on this one right now, or do you want me to go ahead and keep going through these?
Hey, Griffin, one thing.
Yes.
As far as residential goes, my understanding is the proposed revised options do include mobile vending unit on residential if it's associated with a private event.
That is correct. And we will have one of the items, and I'm happy to go to it now if you'd prefer. One of these areas will talk a little bit about special events. So that is one exception. You're absolutely correct that there is an opportunity to have a mobile food vending unit on a residential private parcel up to 2 times a year, but only for a private event, a birthday party, an anniversary party, so on and so forth.
I just wanted to clarify that for that first bullet there.
Yes.
That's it.
As well, I mean, and we'll get into it in a second, but I mean, also, as is with Fruit Street Kitchen, by resolution, I mean.
Correct,
And
yes.
that's
So
still-
that would be on public property.
Or public, as approved, right.
Yes.
I know
So
that's
maybe
coming
that's
up.
the good leeway to the next one on location, and I'm happy to flip back and forth between these as needed. So the other piece of location is public property, so municipal property, if you will. So the existing ordinance allows food trucks to operate on public property as granted by a resolution from the City Council. The proposed ordinance is the exact same way. A food truck could only operate on public property as allowed by a resolution from City Council. This could come into fruition a few different ways. It could be a proactive approval by City Council. The City Council could choose to pre-allocate a couple locations on public property for food trucks. That really we really haven't been getting feedback from council in support of that. I guess that route, but that is an option you all could consider at some point in time. The other piece here would be City Council approving a resolution allowing a specific location at a request of a specific food truck or a specific vendor. An example of that would be more like you were referencing the Fruit Street Kitchen example.
Yeah, so that would be no change. I'm not a fan personally of designating any public spaces, parks or whatnot at this time, so that makes sense.
If it's okay, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to jump back to
Yep,
the
go
private
ahead.
property
Let's
one
get
for a
that
second,
answered.
just to draw a little more attention to those maps you all have in front of you.
Yep,
So
that's
you have
good.
3 maps in front of you. The first one has the least amount highlighted in yellow. That is going to be only showing your B2 and your B4 zoning districts. That's to show, again, where food trucks are allowed to operate presently, given the existing ordinance. You then have another map that has a more of a yellow area. That is to represent the proposed changes. So that allows the B1, B2, B3, B4, as well as the industrial zones. And then there's a third one that includes all of that area, but in 2 different colors. That's really an attempt to try to just show you the differences between the two. So all of the covered areas would be included in the proposed ordinance, where just the dark green area is what would be allowed in the existing ordinance.
That's good. It's very helpful. Thank you.
Councilman Reeser, did you have a question about that one earlier?
I just wanted to be certain, but I think I already answered myself. The proposed ordinance, again, is the one by the Planning Commission. Neither of those two are the ones that City Council talked about the changes.
No. So the proposed ordinance that's listed on these slides is the ones that has already incorporated the feedback from City Council to date.
Oh, they are?
Yes.
Okay.
It's got everything.
Yes.
Because you said there was 3.
There was.
Existing, the proposed by Planning Commission, and the third one you said were the ones proposed by City Council.
Correct.
This is the one proposed by
Yes,
City
so
Council.
these slides are these slides are going to highlight the existing ordinance and the ordinance, the existing, or the working ordinance based on the feedback from City Council.
Yep.
Okay, so if we're okay, going back through our major topics, the next one is going to be vending season. This was another item that was brought up kind of from the beginning of this topic. I think we had a few members of the public speak on this one. So just as a summary, the existing ordinance establishes a vending season where approved food trucks or mobile food vendors can only operate in a designated season, where the proposed changes remove that restriction and would allow them to operate year-round. Is there any comments on this one?
I'm a fan for year-round. I don't see why not, so.
This is one that I was against year-round, but since our last meeting, doing my homework, I've come around on that, so, yeah.
So
I
it
think
sounds
I was
like,
probably the one that spoke against year-round last time.
okay. So it's,
Hearing from my ward, I'm more in favor.
cool.
Joe, go ahead.
So if I could back up a minute, because there's a lot of information going around. To make a broad statement, I think the City Council and the Planning Commission, our responsibility should be economic development. I don't think our responsibility sitting up here should be deciding who we support and who we don't. Meaning, should we limit food trucks downtown? Are we unfairly protecting the businesses versus not, and making all those decisions? So it's a tough decision. It's not an easy black and white decision. So let's just take this. I talked to the largest restaurant today, and I was very surprised. A month ago, I talked to 6 restaurant owners, and they all said it's not fair competition, food trucks, because they're not paying for brick and mortar. So you're going to allow a food truck to come next door to me, or in the Dairy Queen, in this case, the food truck park, and that's not fair competition. I don't have the same overhead, so on and so forth. The restaurant I talked to today was Clementine. I didn't talk to the owner, but I talked to the general manager, a very smart woman. And she really surprised me, and she said, like a lot of residents have said, we can't handle the business that we get during the summer months. I mean, residents have said over and over again, we're standing outside for hours to try to get in. My wife and I have given up in the summer. We have to go out of town to eat in a restaurant. We eat out a lot. So she said we would not mind having food trucks take a little bit of the business, but she didn't want it in the very near downtown. But the other one, back to this slide, what made me think of all this, she's completely for having them in the summer because they need help. They can't handle what they have. But in the winter, the restaurants are running, some of them have said they run at a loss because they just can't get enough customers, and some of them are closing. So my suggestion, because Jeff just brought it up, is I'd rather have it be limited in the amount of the year. So don't have it year-round. Don't have the food trucks in the dead of winter. Let our restaurants, and I'm going contrary to what I just said, I don't think we should protect one business over another, But a small protection wouldn't be bad, not having food trucks in the winter and allowing the brick and mortar enjoy what little business there is out there. So I'm bringing all that up to address the proposed ordinance about year-round. I don't want to see them any longer year-round. I want to see them limited. I agree with the previous slide about the downtown is the stickiest issue of all, having food trucks downtown. That's a tough one. And my opinion has changed on that. Having a food truck park, I was against it completely, talking to 6 restaurants a month ago. Now I'm starting to think maybe we should test the water a little and allow the owner of the Dairy Queen to maybe have at least one food truck. So we have a chance for the consumer in downtown not to stand in line at Clementine or any other restaurant for 2 hours. Because if we really care about tourism, we really want to bring people in this town, and that's one of the big arguments for short-term rentals, we need more properties that people can stay at, then why wouldn't we also want to help the tourists in letting them get food when they're downtown? A lot of people aren't, especially young children, aren't going to want to stand in line or sit outside and wait 2 hours eating in a restaurant. And some people want some different varieties. So maybe, and I'm throwing this around, but maybe, so this is a workshop, just talk about ideas, maybe we should have the Dairy Queen have one food truck to test it.
That we're going to be
And
going.
that goes contrary to the downtown, but it's only one food truck. So I have real mixed feelings about having them in the Dairy Queen, at least having one.
We're going to
But,
work through this point by point, FYI. We're going to walk specifically to food trucks in a second. We'll go step by step.
Okay.
So just to kind of recap on the year-round, it sounds like George and Jeff and Mayor, you're good with year-round, and Joe, you have some reservations, would like to see some of it not year-round. Is
I think
that
the
fair?
market's going to decide if they're going to stay in business or not. I think majority will be open in the winter.
Well,
in the
I think
summer.
one thing regarding the year-round is, as we've heard and as we've discussed, you're talking about a different clientele to a certain extent. So just because there's food trucks year-round doesn't mean they're going to be taking business away from restaurants. Because if people want to go to a restaurant, they're going to go to a restaurant. If they want to just grab something quick, walk up, they're probably not going to go to a restaurant.
Very possible.
Yep, different group. So, yeah, I think some guidance.
Okay. Well, and I'm happy to go back if we need to. So the next one on our list of major topics to get some input on is hours of operation. So the existing ordinance sets a time limit, so hours of operation for each day of 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. The proposed ordinance expands that slightly to 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. The reason behind that, or my recollection, the reason behind that was the Planning Commission had some conversation about making sure that we were not only thinking about, lunch or dinner type food trucks, but remembering that there may be businesses that want to operate in the morning, maybe coffee, maybe donuts, who knows? But just to, that was the reasoning of expanding that slightly. How do you all feel about that?
I'm good with it.
Especially when we pulled it out of residential. The only concern with residential would be someone had a generator or something and they kicked it on at 6 in the morning, but I feel we're kind of removed that section, so I'm good.
Okay. Seems to be some comfort with that. Going to the next one, Councilman Reeser was already hitting on this one a little bit. This was definitely definitely one of these items that we need some direction from council on. So food truck parks, in the existing ordinance does not contemplate food truck parks. This was a topic that was really brought into the discussion based on a resident's kind of specific proposal that was shared with City Council. The Planning Commission worked really hard at exploring this topic and seeing where it may or may not fit. And what they ultimately decided is that in the Central Business District, this may be an appropriate location. So the proposed ordinance that they recommended did include food truck parks in the central business district. There was some mixed feedback from the city council when this was brought before you all. So you can even see that the yes or no part on this one. Right now, it is still in the proposed working draft, but this was almost split 50-50 at the time from city council, so would love some input from you all on how you all feel about this or what types of special use restrictions you all may like to see.
On jump, or I got my thoughts, so.
So I guess one thing is, so the proposed ordinance that allows food truck parks only allows them, it would still be by special use, which means it would still have to go through a review and approval process by
The Planning Commission.
Planning Commission, which would, I think that's a good way to go, because it basically, the ordinance allows it, the details of any specific food truck park would then be able to be, provide input by the public and planning commissioners at the time with the details for the specific food truck park. So I think having it in the ordinance, I think is a good thing.
I guess I think if we're going to contemplate it in the downtown, I would like to tie certain restrictions, bathrooms. I would like, I know there are certain rules about, there's not parking required for restaurants downtown, but this would be a unique use. We could tie some parking requirements to it. As far as total number of vendors, I contemplated in looking at that space a theoretical max of 3. Again, I'm just throwing out, So, again,
I believe that there is a limit of number of food trucks already in there, in the ordinance, with setback requirements and things like that.
Yeah,
It's limited to 5.
yes,
food
to
trucks.
5, so I kind of shrank it.
And there are some requirements built in there as well about electric supply and bathrooms and
Yeah.
restrooms and lighting and that
Restrooms,
kind
yeah.
of those kinds of items. Some
I'd wanna
of,
make
some of
sure
those similar special use type things that the Planning Commission makes sure they review if they get an application.
Yeah. So I guess that would just be a question, is 5 too many versus 3 versus, you know what I mean? So, and then, for me, restrooms would be a must. I wouldn't mind connecting parking to it, up to 3 per vendor. I know there's, this is
what
unique
it's-
use.
For what it's worth, Mr. Mayor, and Councilman Sleeper, please feel free and chime in. I know the Planning Commission did discuss the concept of parking and this use, and ultimately what was decided is that a parking requirement was not going to be tied to it because there aren't parking requirements tied to any other business uses in the central business district. That was kind of what was contemplated and decided at that point. Obviously, if you all want to discuss that more, you're more than welcome to. But that was a concept that was at least brought up and discussed.
Yeah, and I know there are for brick and mortar, but this isn't necessarily a true brick and mortar. We're talking about food trucks here. So that's why I was kind of trying to meet in the middle on that one. So I'm trying to get creative.
Well, I would propose that, if we use the Dairy Queen as an example, and again, any details would come through the Planning
PC.
Commission, but that is a brick and mortar
State, yeah.
restaurant currently.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's just going to be food trucks, and there's always going to be an anchor building for example, that has the restrooms and stuff like that associated with any kind of food truck park.
Yeah.
So,
Don't disagree. Trying to make sure we keep some parking. Joe?
In my opinion, this first year doing this, we should have a limit for the whole city on how many we want to allow. It shouldn't just be completely open to competition and to the marketplace. We should have some kind of a limit to kind of feel this thing out and see what we're doing, if it's right or wrong. So let's just pick a number, hypothetically, if it was 2 to 4 trucks in the whole city. Then the Dairy Queen, call it a park, that should come out of that 4. So let's say we pick a 4, now we pick 1 out of the 4. Well, Dairy Queen can't have 4 or 5 because we only said 4 for the whole city, to see how this works. So why not take the Dairy Queen and give them one to test that area of a food truck park, and then let the other three, will pick spots, because they all have to do a special permit to get a location. Now we have a total of 4, but we tested the water throughout the whole town, including next to the Dairy Queen, so we can see how the restaurants survive having a food truck right downtown, because Dairy Queen is downtown. We have 3 more we picked for around the town, and now we tested the water, and a year from now, we see if what we've done is good, and should we have more, or should we have less?
So if I can provide a little clarification, so the next one of these items we're going to talk about is the number of permits. So talking about establishing a limit is appropriate. That's something you all can talk about. I would like to clarify, though, that the way this ordinance is written, it issues permits for a food truck to operate in an approved location in the city. It does not establish that location and wouldn't prevent that food truck from changing locations as long as it continues to be an approved location in the city. So if I heard you right, theoretically the city could set the permits at 10, and if the food truck park, or if a food truck park is allowed to have 5 of those 10 permits could decide to operate there. It wouldn't necessarily be the same 5 every day. There wouldn't necessarily be 5 there every day. And those other 5 don't necessarily have to have a location approved within the city. What this ordinance contemplates is designating spots that are okay and spots that aren't okay, and then permitting these food trucks to operate within the city, and they can kind of come and go in those spots as needed.
I wanted to point out also that the food truck park requires a certain additional amount of investment, more like a brick and mortar location. So it includes seating elements, it includes restrooms, a designated manager, adequate electrical supply, waste receptacles, a dumpster. So the investment required to get a food truck started is perhaps greater than, or a food truck park started is perhaps greater than just operating a single truck in a single location.
And moreover, as it goes through special land use, it would be permitted for that one truck or whatever the designation is. And as we know, that's going to be, it has to come to a public meeting. There could be restrictions put on it. And I believe that runs with the land. And they'd have to come and reapply to go through the special land use again, if that's what you're thinking about, is adding one truck at a time or so. So there would be, I think, a pretty heavy burden to get to the approvals process as it's currently written as a special land use.
So discussing permit number is something we can definitely do. Are you wanting to stay here, or is it okay if we jump back to food trucks for a little bit? Because
Food truck parks, you mean?
yeah, food truck parks, excuse me, because still looking for a little bit of guidance on how you all are feeling about this. This is something we're comfortable keeping in. If you would like to see it removed, if you'd prefer to work through the others, we can, and I'll make a note. We can jump back to it, but we definitely need some direction on this one.
I mean, it sounds like,
So
it looks like we're seeing a yes. I think it's just, and we like bathrooms.
You're asking for the list again?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, that's fine. I mean, yeah, obviously, the building's got to get upgraded electrical. There's bathrooms, not tying any parking to it. Up to 5 currently, but that, I mean, we have a discussion of 1. I threw out 3, and it's that old slow walk, start with a few, and so I wouldn't be against a smaller number to start. That was,
Again, the number could be worked out in the actual approval of the special land use instead of having to revise the ordinance if we want to actually allow somebody to do what they intend on that.
Yep. Thoughts, ideas?
And as just addressing what Joe was saying, I think having one food truck park, or one food truck in a food truck park, doesn't really test the waters. That doesn't give a good feel for how a food truck park would work, because it is not a food truck park.
It's a food truck.
It's just one food truck.
And
And you lose the
theoretically,
variety of having multiple options in a food truck park, which is what which is what the benefit is of having a food truck park.
Theoretically, it could be limited as well. Just looking at the language, how it's written right now, it says it proposes up to 5 food trucks in a food truck park. So Councilman Sleeper's correct that, you know, if a special use permit was brought to the Planning Commission and they found that, you know, an appropriate condition would be to limit it to less than 5, the way the ordinance is written right now, that could be an option.
Griffin, we started off by saying we didn't want food trucks downtown, right in the business district, right on Phoenix, that area, correct? That's where city council ended last time. And so, based on my conversation with Clementine, based on my own thoughts, I'm thinking, this is just me, that maybe we test the waters next to the Dairy Queen. So you're right, George, it's not then a food court if we allow food park, if a truck park, if it's only one. But why do we have to have a true food court there? Why don't we just allow one truck to be there for the summer? And now the businesses can give us feedback at the end of the summer and say, this is what we think that food truck did to our business. It took away nothing, it added tourists, or it took away 5 or 10% of my most precious 4 months of business. If we start off with 4 trucks or 3 trucks and we make a whole food court and a Dairy Queen invest all that money in bathrooms and seating and all that, and it takes away a lot of the business from the downtown, then we'd have to question whether it was a good decision. Having said all that, I start off by saying it's not our job to dictate competition, but we have 6 out of 7 restaurants I spoke to all are concerned about having non-brick and mortar competing against their restaurants. So that's why I thought of one. It's not a food court, but at least it's a food truck down there, and we can see what impact it has on the businesses.
The reason is because going back to allowing locations on private property, it's based on zoning district. So if you're going to allow food trucks in the central business district at Dairy Queen, you likely wouldn't be able to say it couldn't operate in the central business district on private property at another location. For the exception of a food truck park, which is a different type of land use altogether that you're proposing being allowed in the central business district. Again, theoretically, the Dairy Queen parking lot that's been discussed isn't the only location that this could take place in, but the Planning Commission did look, as well as staff, and there's not too many places that are going to have the private parking and other necessary amenities to be able to make that work. So that's the reason. Again, theoretically, you could allow a food truck park and reduce the number of trucks that are allowed to go there, but that's why you can't just say you can have one food truck at that location and not somewhere else.
So because of that, it's all or nothing. If you allow one, you have to allow it elsewhere, and you just said in the downtown. So if we call it a food truck park, then we have to have more than one, and that's the only way you can have that different than the rest of downtown.
You don't have to have more than one, but other similarly situated properties that can meet the same conditions would have to be allowed.
Which is the bathrooms, the
And
seating. And all
correct. And I think the idea is by just saying one on private property in the central business district, that is reasonably available in lots of locations where when you start to add more restrictions and special use permits and describe the conditions that are a food truck park, it significantly limits the available locations in the central business district where that could occur.
that. Gotcha.
So I guess circling back to food truck parks, we have it here, we're just looking for some feedback. Do you, currently it's written to be in the central business district. I'm sure the Planning Commission looked at other districts, perhaps B2, B4, but this is what's in the ordinance right now. What is council thinking about that provision?
For my take, I like what George has had to say about it would start with Planning Commission, so there would be some eyes on the business plan. before it gets to city council. And I think it's too hard to say. It certainly would be nice to maybe put a number on it, 3, 4. But we don't know, the gentleman owns it, we don't know what his business plan is yet. Maybe one of the food vendors is gonna be a coffee cart with donuts, and that's gonna be very small. Well, then the next one is a pizza place, and the next one is tacos, and so we don't know, and that's why probably needs to go to planning. And I'm reluctant to put a hard number on it, but a low number is probably better.
Right, and I don't believe special land uses do come to council. They're finalized at the planning commission, so you would be putting a lot of faith into the ordinance, and of course, the evaluation to be done by planning commission based on, setbacks and the other conditions that were listed in there.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I think I've stated smaller, slow walk. So if it went to 3, I wouldn't be disappointed.
I'm good with the way it is.
How do you
If it's
feel?
all or nothing, then I'd prefer not to have a food truck park.
Okay.
So I am still seeing that there's some, there's a variety of thoughts on this one, recognizing that obviously we have 4 of the 7 here. One thing we can do is if we can come to consensus on the rest of these items, or pretty much the rest of these items, we can essentially bring 2 versions to you at a future meeting, one with and one without, and you all can decide how you want to go from there.
I think there's enough, yeah.
Okay.
We want it, just a question of how it looks.
Okay.
I mean, I think you've got enough consensus.
If
to
we're
go.
comfortable going to the next one, I'm happy to go back to this if there are other thoughts. But this was very similar. I know Councilman Reeser mentioned setting or a maximum number of permits issued in the city. So presently, this is not included in the existing ordinance. My recollection is the Planning Commission had a little bit of discussion about limiting the number of permits, but ultimately kind of ended on the idea that the market would sort that piece out. And then this was a major, I guess, kind of change or topic that was suggested by the city council, and it was incorporated into the most up-to-date version of the proposed ordinance, and that number of permits would be designated by resolution from city council. So it could be adjusted as necessary on an annual basis.
I think this would be a good time to just kind of remind, it's come off often, this is, you're going to change the ability for people to have special events, or again, the other, just to, again, clarify to folks, this is not changing that. So if you're having, special events, it's a different basket we're talking about.
Correct.
there.
Yep. So I can jump to this real quick and then go back if that's helpful. So the proposed ordinance language it states that food trucks in conjunction with city council approved events. So this would be things like approved special events such as festivals or the farmers market. They would be exempt from this permitting requirement. It also has kind of an exception that Councilman Sleeper mentioned earlier, that they would be allowed in residential property in very unique situations related to hosting a private event, a birthday or a graduation, that'd be limited to 2 times a year on properties other than business STRs. So yes, those are 2 kind of, I guess I called them special events, but kind of special exceptions, if you will.
Makes sense. I know someone asked earlier about, how do we keep track of those business SDRs? And at the end, the reason that is put in there is because residents, you're unlikely to have more than 1 or 2 events at your home versus a rental could theoretically have a party a week. So
And this required the ordinance lists it requires kind of a special permit for this private event on residential parcels. So part of getting that special permit is city staff would be able to verify whether that is or isn't a business short-term rental. So I think we'd be able to address that concern.
Gotcha. And now, currently, Fruit Street Kitchen is the only one that we've got out there, correct? I mean, as far as a true ask, I mean, we have a food truck park. Any others that we've got?
No, but I did get several calls this season kind of asking about what's going on with food trucks and kind of waiting to see. But yes, to my knowledge, the only food truck that operated in town through the appropriate processes this year was Fruit Street Kitchen. There have been ones in the past that I know have gone through the existing permitting process and operated like out at Barden's or Walmart or more out in the B4 areas, but I don't believe we had any of those this year.
Yeah, I've talked to a few different, vendors, merchants that have kind of said, what if, kind of out of the downtown area. So I'm not I like the thought of a number. If we end up with whatever, 3 to 5 downtown and add on from there, I don't mind.
Just to clarify again, setting a number doesn't necessarily mean all of those trucks are going to operate in the city at the same time on any given day. I guess theoretically they could if they're all in approved spots. But how the proposed ordinance is written, it would just allow them to get a permit and then they could operate according to the ordinance.
Right. So currently we've got one.
And I just want to recap. So we're saying that like Harbor Fest and Blueberry Fest down on Water Street, that would continue the same as it always
Yep.
is. The lemonade stand in Stanley Johnson during the art fair continued just like it always is. We're just talking about
Yep,
introducing
these are
some
outside of
new
community, city
people to
council,
come.
community events.
Yep, okay.
Yes. Same with the farmer's market. It would
Yeah, farmer's market.
operate as it has been.
So I like the thought of a number.
So I'm okay having the ordinance allow a limit as set by resolution based on the number of food trucks that we have currently under our existing ordinance. I don't expect there's going to be that much of a demand under the new ordinance. So, but we would at least have that as an option to set a limit if we so desire as city council.
I would agree with that. Like Mr. Campbell, mentioned that too. Let's start small. Let's put a sunset clause on it, so we'll come back and look at it in a year. How'd that go? Did it go well? Did it go bad? Do we need to let more in? Lower the number? So yeah, I would support some sunset clauses and a cap on number.
How big are we thinking? 10?
So the way the language is written right now, it says that the city council may establish by resolution a maximum number of permits issued during a calendar year. So you don't have to, but the ordinance would give you all the ability to. You also could kind of at its inception set a starting number, a cap if you want to. So I think Councilman Arnold mentioned, it gives city council that option, and then you all can discuss how you see fit to implement that.
I'm game. Throw out a number.
Yeah, do we want to wait till everyone's here? But
Yeah. Are you looking for guidance on a?
Yeah, do you need
on
a number right now, or do you want-
I've thrown out a couple numbers just based on
Don't
downtown.
need a number right now, but if you all would like to discuss that, we're happy to do what we can to help. Is there? Sure.
Yes, I guess I would suggest that if you have a number in mind, it'd be good to share it, because if we're going down this road and this is the language you like, and we go through the process of adopting it, we might want to adopt a corresponding resolution at the same time to kind of give an idea. So it would be helpful, I think, for us to know if we
notice
have an
and-
idea in mind.
The only other piece would be, are you all comfortable with how the language is written, that number of permits, the maximum number of permits could be established by resolution? Or if you all want a firmer cap, again, theoretically, it could be built into the ordinance, but this was written this way to give you all a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, make it flexible. That makes sense.
I would prefer not to have it in the ordinance, because the ordinances are a lot more difficult to change than resolutions.
Yeah, I would agree. Keep it.
Joe had a comment.
So,
I'm not so concerned about whether it's in the ordinance or not, and maybe George is right. But I do want to have a number, a cap, the first year, somewhere between 2 and 4. So, again, so we can learn about what works and what doesn't, and a year later, review this thing. I don't want to leave this up in the air, how many we're going to have. So I'd like to have some kind of a cap, whether it's in an ordinance or not, but limit the number of permits in the city. That's tied in, though, with the locations. We haven't talked about the actual locations. So I got the maps, but.
Right, so we're not, what do you mean by specific locations? So
Where in this city, are we going to pick actual locations?
No.
We're not.
We designate zoning districts where they could be allowed on private property. On public property, the city council could presumably pick some specific locations. But the consensus to this point has been they were going to wait and do that kind of on a as requested basis as opposed to doing it ahead of time.
Okay.
No, I would agree.
Okay.
And it's agreed, no residential. We're not going to put as one resident asked Diane, we're not going to put a food truck around Kids Park. We're not going to put a food truck on Monroe Boulevard.
Correct. So the only food trucks that could operate on public property would have to get approved by city council. So you all would have to approve if a food truck was going to operate at Kids Corner.
And we're not putting any parameters on it now.
No, it'd be done by resolution. So if council did want to select certain areas that are public property to have a food truck, that would be done by resolution. If no resolution was passed, that means
It couldn't do
public
it.
property is not available.
Okay.
So similarly to the conversation about setting the number of permits by resolution, permit fees are also contemplated in the ordinance to be established by city council resolution.
And before we go there, did anyone else besides Joe want to share the number they were thinking about for the limits on permits? Because I'm hearing from Joe, you want between 2 and 4.
I'm thinking more like 10. Because even if we issue 10 permits, it's probably more like 1 or 2 operating, in any given time. So I don't think a higher number means you're going to have food trucks operating all the time.
I'm agreeable with 10, and same thing, if food trucks go like they're supposed to, some of them will be here a few days, and they'll be someplace else a few days, and they won't all be here at once.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the number I had down, so that's kind of where I was going to land, assuming some will end up at a food truck, the others you'd scatter around. Because, again, and how we apply for them, we can get into that later, but, I mean, just want to make sure we have enough to, go around for our existing people, so.
Okay, thank
Good with
you.
that?
Yes, so that's probably a good point. The way the ordinance is presently written is it'd be on a first come, first served basis.
Yep.
So if that's not, if you all are going to establish a cap and want to see a different way to go about it, that's something we could get some input on. But how it's presently written is it's first come, first serve. So moving on, let me stop there first. We did go onto this slide a couple times already earlier at the beginning when we were talking about the private residential events, and then a little bit ago, Councilman Arnold mentioned the city council approved community events. Were there any other questions or concerns about some of these special situations that the ordinance contemplates? Okay, so hearing none. Very similar to establishing a maximum number of permits, the ordinance contemplates establishing a permit fee for the annual food truck permit. Notice, looking at this now, I probably should clarify that. So the existing ordinance does allow the charging of fees. A fee was just never established to our knowledge, so fees had not been charged in the past, again, at least to my knowledge, where the proposed ordinance, similar to most other ordinances that the city adopts that establishes fees, designates that a resolution from city council could establish an appropriate fee. So similarly to the conversation about what type of maximum number of permits would city council like to see, it would be helpful for city council to give some input on what fee they would like to see. What's the amount of a fee they would like to see? We have done some review and shared, I believe, with city council. We have seen fees kind of as low as $25 and $50 all the way up to, I think we saw samples of $500 to $750 in some communities. So
Somewhere above that.
some feedback would be helpful.
So the fee should make up for the administrative cost. It shouldn't be a moneymaker for the city, so.
Correct. It still has to be proportional to the cost of administering the
Right.
programs.
So I don't know how much administrative effort is involved in reviewing a permit, but I would think it would probably be on the lower end, like $50 to $100. I wouldn't think it would be like $1,000 or something like that. But I think staff would be in a better position to recommend something than just me trying to pull something out of my head.
Thank you.
Any thoughts just on any of the recouping of, I mean, whether or not it's garbage, or, I mean, it's just trash pickup. Well, I mean, there's going to be staff time, because people are going to take their food, we're going to go point to point B. I mean, to assume they're not is, again, people are driving on the roads to get to them. Are they going to, there's an infrastructure, there's a cost to do business in this town, and we can't not account for that. I mean,
I think it would be safe to say that there will be some initial vetting, and of course, possibly a zoning permit would have to be issued for the property to make sure that the setbacks and everything else. But we can also see that, code enforcement would take a ride around, just make sure that it's being followed. So I think there would be some ongoing, just checking in and evaluating throughout the year. So that would be something we would factor in. And I know the Planning Commission did kind of hear a couple of recommendations that we had heard from around other communities, and I think those were $500 or $750. I know that others had done something maybe a little bit more, but that could be something we could work in a recommendation.
Yep. And to clarify, ultimately, the Planning Commission kind of stated, as they normally do, at least in my experience, that fees are more in the purview of the City Council than the Planning Commission. So they did not make a recommendation or really get into much detail on fees. They left that for the City Council to establish.
okay. Yeah, like I said, I just want to make sure we're accounting for all the infrastructure-related costs it takes to do business in this town. Streets, electric, water, all of it, it's business, so.
And I'd add that what we're talking about is we're going to revisit it yearly, so that's a cost as well, so we'll have to take that into consideration.
You could, yes.
That we're going to be reviewing and,
Okay. Any other thoughts on fees? Yes.
Yeah, back to the fees. The one variable, I can see the businesses being pretty straightforward. You can figure out how much it's going to cost the city and make the fee appropriate. The residential permits could be the sticky one, because they're allowed up to 2 a year, non-STRs. Now you got to figure out, are they really not an STR? Are they only doing 2? I just think there could be a little more paperwork. And I'm not saying they should be as high as one that has it all year, or if we decide for 6 months of the year. But that is a little more of an unknown, how much tracking you're going to have to do with residential permits. And what you don't want is somebody doing 4 and 5 and slipping through the system, nor do you want an STR in a neighborhood having a party with a food truck coming. So we have enough trouble trying to track STR compliance. I just think this one could be a little stickier than the year-round or a whole year permit. Does that make sense?
Got some guidance.
Okay. Yeah, so it's looking like there's going to be a couple different fees that we'll have to look at for the annual permit, the operation on the residential parcel for a special event, and then the zoning compliance piece. So we can work on that and bring that back in a resolution form as well.
Sounds good.
With that, it sounds like we've worked our way through the 7 major topics. Are there any of these that council would like to revisit? Or are there any questions we can try to answer? I know the mayor mentioned a little bit about kind of the application process. Do you want us to speak a little bit to
let's
that?
go through the,
Before we do that, is it possible to upload the map that shows the blue and the green colors overhead? Because I think, just to clarify, I know that that's what's being proposed, and this is based on our working copy from the input from 9.6. And so this takes into account the B2, B4, B1, B3, and the industrial zones. And just as Griffin had said, the B2 are traditionally what is acceptable today where food trucks may operate. But the blue zones, or what is being expanded, is that, and this is for private property, I should say, is council good with these districts, these zoning districts?
Yeah, thanks for doing those maps per my request.
We
I'm a
do-
visual person, I like maps,
we
so
do
thank
like
you.
maps,
I
yes.
appreciate that, so.
I'm good with the districts that are proposed.
Yep, go.
Now you can see why we print them off too, because
Yeah, no.
the shape of our maps don't show great on
That's
on the
great.
screens.
It's perfect. It's all good.
Jeff and Joe, are you guys good with those districts? Okay.
It's very helpful.
Okay, so to speak to an application process a little bit, the proposed application process really wouldn't differ too much from the existing application process. It just clarifies it a little bit more of what types of materials are required to be submitted. So it would be a pretty standard application, so information about the truck and the operator. But the couple important pieces that are specific to a food truck permit would be a certificate of liability insurance would need to be committed or submitted to the city, as well as they would have to submit their certification, their documentation from the Van Buren County or another appropriate health department. So just as a friendly reminder for city council, we are not the entity who is inspecting these trucks and determining compliance to the health department codes. They would actually have to get that ahead of time and submit that with their application for us to consider them for a permit. With that, are there questions? Are there any of these topics we can go back to? In a little bit of a summary, our goal this evening was just to kind of take a step away from what often can be the pretty dense ordinance language that's brought before you all in meetings, and instead break this into what we hope were relatively digestible kind of focus areas. Try to get some consensus on those. What our goals will be moving forward would be take the input that we got tonight, update the proposed ordinance language. We would then be able to bring that back to City Council at a future meeting for your consideration or further discussion.
Sounds good. If there's no questions, good.
Just one thing, and this maybe could be something that the city attorney may address, but the Planning Commission chair had brought up the issue on the food truck trailer and whether or not we're going down a slippery slope as far as maybe setting a precedence for allowing other types of trailers on residential properties. And
We can take a look at that definition with the city attorney.
okay.
Sounds good. Anything else? Good. Motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Good night. Cool. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Appreciate it.